Oh my gosh. I'm trying to like get the angle right and it's just not working. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is very weird for me. I have never filmed a video in the car, nor have I filmed a video in the car while I'm in the driver's seat. But today I want to talk about my kind of like how I kind of conquered my fear of driving. I mean, obviously because I'm in the front seat of a car. But yeah, I'm just in this community center right now. It's not too busy. There's no one beside me. Actually, there's a car over there, but I don't think anyone's in there. I got my Starbucks. I got a iced matcha latte, if you're wondering. But you will see all about what I eat this week in my next video. I think this video is coming up before my what I eat in the week, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel if you like my content. But yeah, without further ado, let me just get into this video because I do have somewhere to be, so let's just go ahead and get started. So where I live, a lot of people get their license when they start their whole licensing process when you're 16. So I got my permit when I was 16. I know in like the States and stuff you can actually physically start driving when you're 16, but not here. Funny enough, I had no intentions of driving. Like, I had no interest in driving at all. Where I live in a town and everything is it's a pretty built up town. It's not like one of those like small town areas. So walking everywhere when I was in high school, walking with my friends to places, to go eat, to the mall was very common. So like driving just didn't really seem that necessary to me. But I had this like weird thing where I refused to turn 17 without getting my license, or at least my permit, because I was convinced that's what you do when you're 16, you get your permit. So 5 days before my 17th birthday, I actually went and got my permit. Here in Ontario, it's called your G1. So I went and I got my G1 license. So that gave me the permit to drive. So after I got my permit, I went to driving school. I drove with my parents. I got an instructor. I did that whole thing as everyone else does. And then this was probably the summer before I went to college. And the summer before I went to college, I went for my test. While I was learning how to drive, honestly, I wasn't a huge fan. Like I said, I had no interest in driving. Like, I feel like a lot of teens think about like what car they want to get and stuff. That was not me. Like, I couldn't even I just didn't care enough. Like, I really didn't even think about what car I wanted. I was just so not about the driving life, but I did it. There's a car backing up. So I waited until the summer before I went to college. I went and finally did my driving test. I actually failed the first time. If you want a whole story time on that, I will make one. It's really funny. But I went the second time. This is so awkward. I think I've changed the angle like 8 times. Hopefully this works. You're like in between the steering wheel. This is a really awkward angle, but it's gonna have to do for now. Yeah, so I went and got my license. I failed the first time, so if you want a whole story time on that, I will make one. It's really funny. The second time I passed, yay, and I actually drove by myself because my dad is low-key crazy, and like it was like kind of a situation, but basically we had 2 cars. I had my mom's and my dad's car, and we had to drive them both back home. So he made me drive one of them home by following him at like 2 hours after I got my license. It was so stressful, but I did it. So I actually drove by myself, and then I think I drove one last time before I went to college. I moved to Guelph. So I moved to Guelph in first year. I had this like thing. I like never came home in first year. I don't know. I think I just wanted to get out of my town. So like I never went home. So I was always at Guelph. In the times that I did come home, my parents just drove because I was only home for like a few weekends. So by the time I actually came home, it was summer, and I came back in the summer. And at this point, it had been about like 7 or 8 months since I had driven, and even before I left for Guelph I hadn't driven a lot, but it had been 7 or 8 months since I had driven. And when I came back from my first year of Guelph, all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't drive because it had been so long. I just felt like I didn't know how to drive. I didn't remember how to drive. I felt like I didn't remember how to drive. I felt like I didn't remember anything, and I was so like terrified of even just sitting in the passenger seat. I would be like, okay, like today I'm gonna go driving, and then I would work myself up to go, and then I like couldn't get in the car. Like I couldn't do it. It was just so, I mean, it was frustrating. So where I live, after you've gotten your permit, you actually have 5 years to complete the whole licensing system. There's another test that you have to do on the highway. It's kind of dumb, but so the license that I got that allowed me to drive by myself here is called the G2 in Ontario. So I still needed to get my G, and in Ontario, once you've gotten your permit, aka your G1, you have 5 years to get your full G license. So after first year, when I came back and I was like having a lot of anxiety about driving, I was just kind of like, well, it's fine, I still have another like 5 years to get this license, so I'm not even gonna stress out about it. So I just didn't bother driving. But then this continued all throughout university. Like every time I would come home from the summer, I would work myself up to go, and then I would want to go driving, and then I would get too nervous. And of course, with fears and anxieties, the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And so this continued all the way up until honestly last year. I think I drove like 2 times, one with my mom in like an empty parking lot, and that was like, and I think one other time with her, but other than that I did not drive up until like last year. The issue was, other than the fact that I wasn't driving, my license was expiring. It expired in 2019, so my original license expired in 2019, so I had no time. And the only way to renew your license here is you either retake your road test or you go on the highway and take your highway test. I haven't driven at that point. I had driven like maybe 1 time in a parking lot, so I was not ready for either of those scenarios. So safe to say it was fucked. Despite the fact that I felt like I wasn't ready for either of those scenarios, I was like, let me just go for it. So last year I started booking lessons, and that really helped with my confidence. Everything came back to me, which is something I wish I remembered, and something I'll tell to you guys if you've had your life, if you were in a similar situation as myself. Driving is like riding a bike, and you might forget sometimes like the details, but you will never like forget how to drive unless you suffer some type of brain injury that, or like physical ailment that will prevent you from driving. But it's like riding a bike, and once you learn how to drive, you're never gonna forget how to drive unless, you know, something happens. You might forget like little details or like what little signs mean, but generally you're not gonna forget how to drive. So I wish I remembered that. Keep that in mind. But basically I ended up taking more lessons with an instructor. I went driving with my parents, and they were like, okay, book your test. So I booked my test. Ideally, I think it was for the end of August, so I wanted to book it end of August, so before I went back to school I would have my license. But as the time approached for me to take my test last August, I just became more and more anxious, to the point where even just the thought of booking the test was like enough to send me in a full-fledged panic. Like it was so bad. I just could not do it, even though everyone was telling me I was ready and I was fine, I was a good driver, I would pass. I just did not feel ready or confident enough to even book the test. Despite what other people were telling me, I let my license expire, and I decided that this year I was going to retake it. And in that period of time, I was still taking lessons with my instructor, because my license didn't expire until October. I still had a few months after I officially decided I was not going to be taking my test. I still had some time to figure that whole situation out. So I went and did that. Despite what everyone was telling me, I just knew I just was not comfortable. And even if I did take my test and I passed, I knew I still wouldn't even get on the road because of how anxious I felt about it. So I just didn't take it. Instead, this year I just retook the whole thing, which I think I didn't mention, but here it's really dumb, but if your license expires before you get your full G license, you have to redo the whole thing over again. But here's the thing I didn't know. If you already took driving school like I did, and if you've already had your D2 like I did, you don't have to wait that whole year. Like I know in a lot of places, even in a lot of different countries, once you get your permit, you have to wait a full year before you can go over your road test. test. But here, if you've already had your G2, you don't have to wait another year. So I just did it right away. So I did my G1, and as soon as I got my G1, I went and started booking driving lessons with my instructor again. And I originally booked my road test again for the beginning of April. The reason I did that was because we were supposed to go on a trip to Hawaii. I think I mentioned that for my grad, beginning of April, like mid-April, and I wanted to have my license so that I could go driving in Hawaii. I feel like that would be really fun. And of course, Corona happened, and literally, I kid you not, the DMVs in Ontario closed a week before I was supposed to take my test. I was so pissed, but anyway, it gave me more time to practice with my dad, so I just kept practicing, and then I went ahead, rebooked my test for July 2nd. And then they canceled it again because they had this kind of weird system, like not weird, like 3-4 step system that they were implementing to kind of ensure the safety of the drivers, which I agree with, but it was just annoying for me. So they canceled it again, and then I went and booked it again for August. I think it was August 13th. Did my test, and I passed, you guys. I passed my test. The test was so easy. Like, honestly, I was a bit concerned as to how short and easy this test was. I think because of Corona, they wanted to shorten the route a little bit to ensure the safety of the instructor. So it worked out perfectly for me because I was so nervous for my test, you guys. Like, I wasn't really nervous. Like, I was nervous I was gonna fail, but I was more nervous like I didn't remember the test, like this testing situation, because at that point it had been like 5 years since I had taken my road test, so I didn't know like if there was new stuff, like if the instructors were nice. Like, I couldn't remember anything about it, so I was, safe to say, I was nervous. I had my license for the past few weeks. This is my third time driving alone. I went to Starbucks this morning, which was big. I had to park in the plaza, and I drove on the main roads a little bit. I drove around town by myself. But back to the whole conquering fear issue, because I feel like I didn't really touch on that too much. I was just talking about my story with it, but how I got over it, I didn't. I'm still pretty nervous driving, but after thinking about it more, I think it's more of a performance anxiety thing. I feel like I drive better alone. I know some people it's the opposite, but for me, I feel like I just don't like having people in my car judging my driving. I don't know, because I feel like I make more mistakes that way. And I think just having other drivers on the road really stresses me out. Like, I hate when people are behind me. I think a lot of people are like that though, so that does give me some solace. When it comes to driving, it's scary. I don't care what anyone says, I don't care what they tell you, it's scary, okay? And driving is dangerous, and if you don't have enough confidence, that can be a very deadly situation. So if you're watching this video and you have fear of driving, which you probably are, or you know someone who is, it's completely fine. Like, don't push yourself to do something, especially as like dangerous as driving. I think other things, sure, but driving's risky, it's dangerous, and one wrong move, like, it can be bad. So if you don't feel confident enough to do that and get yourself from point A to point B safely, then don't. You know, take your time, take it slow. If you're not ready to drive, then don't. If you have to do donuts and do laps in the parking lot for weeks just to feel comfortable getting on the main road, do that. Don't let people bully you into driving, especially something as dangerous as driving. If you're not ready to do it, even if you're like 30, 40, 50, whatever, if you're not ready, don't do it. It's just, it's not worth it. For example, with me, like last year when I was thinking about booking my test, everyone was like, you're ready, like you can do it. They probably were right. I probably could have done my test and I would have passed, I would have been fine, but I knew in my spirit I was not ready to get on the road and do all that. So that's the big thing. Don't let people bully you into doing something that you're not ready to do. Just make sure you're comfortable before you start getting on the road, and I think that would really help with your anxiety. The second thing is to take it slow. I know you've probably heard that a million times, but really take it slow. Like, even though I could have went for my test last year, I didn't. I wasn't ready, didn't feel ready, so I took it slow. That's what I felt comfortable doing, and that's what I continue to do. Even driving by myself, taking it slow. I just drove in the neighborhood, and then if I'm not driving in the neighborhood, I went to a very small plaza. It's like, I think it's 9 something, so there's not a lot of people. Stores aren't really open. It's very low stress environment just to get myself used to driving, so do that. being in a low stress environment is also very important. So if you can find a good instructor that makes you feel comfortable, my instructor was really good, or a parent that is also very good. For example, I would not learn how to drive with my mom. She's too high stress for me, so I went with my dad, and I'm really happy I did because I felt a lot less stressed when I was learning how to drive. So if you are just like learning how to drive, or if you're practicing and revamping your skills, find someone that's a little less high anxiety inducing, because my mom was definitely not the person for that. So that's something. And again, practice. And even if that means just staying in the parking lot for 1,000 years, do that. Honestly, it's not a race. Sometimes it feels like it is because you feel like, oh my god, I'm 22, I'm 23, I'm 30, I'm 40, and I don't have my license. It's not a race, and no one should care whether or not you have your license or not. It doesn't make you a better person or a worse person whether you have your license or not. It's not a big deal. It's just, it's you, it's your life. Literally, it's your life in your hands, and if you're not comfortable driving on the road, that's fine. There's no need to rush it. There's no need to put the pedal to the metal if you're not ready for that. So just make sure you're really in tune with how you're feeling. You know, if you're ready to get on the big girl road, as I call them, then do that. If you're not, then you're not. That was the end of my video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sure you'll have more questions and more stories for me to go over and read in the comments. So if you have any more questions about conquering your fear of driving, or even just, I'm still in the process of doing that, but I'm not an expert by any means, but if you have any questions for me or you need any advice, please leave your questions in the comments and I will be sure to get to them and reply. I might make a whole separate video on actual things that I did that I think really helped me, so that will definitely be coming up in the next little bit, because I just realized this is more like my story, but I do want to give actual tips. That's the end of my video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like and comment and subscribe to this channel. I would really appreciate it. We're moving on up there in the subscriber count. Yeah, I will see you guys in my next video, and I'll talk to you guys later. Signing out from my car.